I'm going to ask for a final round of questions, and I think we should have time to respond to those and for closing remarks as well. So I think what I'll do is, unless speakers think it would make sense to do this a little bit differently, but I'd like to propose that we take the final questions and speakers get a little bit more time so they can both answer a question and give their closing remarks, because I think that's going to, that'll still take us about 30 minutes to move all the way through. So maybe 5 minutes for responses and closing remarks. And I'm just going to do the same thing where I just give you time at the end. So I've got one question about how do we protect our planet and ourselves, along with throwing our minds and hearts and bodies on the line, taking into account prison sector workers, all the different sectors of workers throughout society. And second, I have all of the tendencies speaking recognize the centrality of a coherent revolutionary force. But of course, all of us here are part of an atomized revolutionary socialist movement on a worldwide basis. What is the way toward a regroupment of revolutionary forces to meet the future described by Robinson, a future shaped by new crisis and new repression? And I believe that is it. If someone wants to type up a question, now is the time to do it. Otherwise, I think William Robinson gets the first crack at the final remarks. I think I got your name wrong when I last referred to you, and I apologize for that. There's just a lot of messages coming through, and I'm all over the place. So, anyone typing in?
A little question, are the messages in the chat controller and the chat little icon we have here, are those the messages? Are those the questions? Or can I find them somewhere else in the panel here?
I think you're looking at the same thing I'm looking at. It says below, so if you make it a more or less a full screen, there should be a Zoom webinar chat, and there are comments being placed in that chat.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I'm seeing.
That's a place. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, so if you'd like to refer to the question in writing, there it is.
Okay.
Okay. All right, when you're ready to go, Professor Robinson, go ahead.
Actually, I regret I only have about a minute left, and I don't know what I can say substantially in a minute. I'm sorry, I need to leave. Early. Maybe I'll just say one thing, and this is in response not to the two questions that you just read to us by, and I don't remember who it was, maybe Ernie, about the challenges in the United States. I just want to point out that one of the problems that we have had here is that there has been among a portion of the left, but also the more general progressive forces and the social movements, a romanticized view of the progressive and the social democratic governments in Latin America. And that's been very difficult for us to find the middle ground here between opposing the far-right insurgency in Latin America and US policy on the one hand, but also giving our support to those that were struggling and have been struggling against extractivism and repression on the part of Missé, on the part of Correa, on the part of Venezuela and so forth. So that's a challenge I think that we face in the United States, and I don't know how that's going to play itself out in the coming weeks, months, and years. And I just want to conclude by saying it's been a real privilege to participate with you in this. I'm sorry that I only had 2 hours, and that's that my time is over now. But I hope we have an opportunity. I have an opportunity again to participate in this type of an activity.
It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope so as well. I'm sure others do believe the same.
Thank you, William.
Have a good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, Blanca, you're
Okay.
up next.
Yes. So, well, there was a question about should we try to kind of have a position towards dividing, I think the question of Stephanie, dividing so how to relate to the army apparatus and the paramilitary force in this revolutionary process, right? Because one thing that is clear is like any revolution will only triumph if it's able to defeat the state apparatus and to some degree to break the lower ranks from the upper ranks. And at the same time, we know that the same paramilitary process apparatus is the one that is destroying not only the earth, but is also attacking us. And I do think that in Chile, the situation is posed very clear. Like the army who is repressing the movement is facing a lot of pushback from the population, and there's a lot of demoralization. I mean, of course, the government is forcing them to continue, but the ranks, the lower ranks of the military police are not doing well. And I think this question becomes further complicated when we're talking about the indigenous territories, because in the indigenous territories, it's very, very hard to even break the ranks of the military. The polarization is very, very strong, and the repression of the Mapuche people is immediately linked with the destruction of the environment. So I do think we need to understand that this process is going to happen differently in big urban areas or in like indigenous occupied land, right? I do think we need to have a little bit of a sophisticated understanding. But I want to finish discussing a little bit what is our task here in the US and addressing the question Christine has posed about left regroupment. I do think that what we need to do here in the United States, of course, the immediate response has been to provide material support and solidarity for the people in struggle. We have raised funds to send to the street medic groups that are helping people in the mobilizations, healing them. But we need to go beyond the charity-like material solidarity. We need to start a political connection with these movements. And I think there are two things we should try to do together, because I do believe that left group regroupment happens through a combination of joint political intervention and programmatic discussion, right? And so here, for example, in the United States, I do think we need to organize big protests in the embassies and the consulates of Chile, of Bolivia, of Colombia, condemning the political repression these governments are doing. Because we do need to delegitimize the Piñera government. We need to also show that it is a scam that this government is trying to lead a constitutional convention. At the same time, he's torturing, repressing, jailing political militants. And at the same time, while we do that, we also need to point the finger to our own administration, to the Trump administration, and to the continuity of the US government always backing repressive governments, training repressive governments in Latin America, giving them the tools to further this. And for example, to contest the Plan Mexico, which is giving a lot of tools to the Mexican government to also repress the social movement. But more importantly, I do think we need to have a discussion here at the Revolutionary Left about also building a movement to push back against the free trade agreements, the foreign debt, and the IMF plans. Because without the cancellation of the foreign debt, we're not going to be able to even have the basics for these countries to fight, to have a chance to build a different economy. And I do think here the challenge is how we do that, not just with a bunch of activists that go to protest, but how do we involve the working class organizations? Because I agree with Juan that in the end, it is those who are in these key sectors of the economy, like the dock workers, like the mining workers, like these are the ones that when they stop the country. And in this country, we have seen the teachers stop and the GM workers stop. And how do we get the teacher unions who are fighting, the GM workers, the auto workers, the dock workers to also start saying, you know what, we don't agree with your free trade agreements because they're hurting Latin American workers. We don't agree with you backing the Piñera government because it's hurting Latin American workers. I think if we can start building together these mobilizations, also to oppose war in Iran, if we find each other together in the struggle, fighting for the same thing, then we're going to have the time and the conditions to then do more in-depth programmatic discussions to see if we can advance towards forming a joint revolutionary party. Because I agree with Christine, we have an urgency to regroup left forces. Now, I think the method should be a combination of joint practical work together and political discussion. And there is plenty of work we can start doing together here in the United States in relation to what is happening in Latin America and to what is happening in this country.